My hands were steady. I remember noticing that, almost surprised by it. 63 years old, standing in the middle of a banquet hall I'd helped finance 15 years ago, and my hands were completely still while everything around me was falling apart. Let me back up. My name is Gerald. I spent 37 years in commercial real estate, not the flashy kind you see on television, not the guys in tailored suits hosting open houses for celebrity clients. I was the quiet kind, the kind who drives a 10-year-old Ford F-150 because it runs fine and there's no reason to replace something that works. The kind who wears flannel on weekends and knows how to lay a subfloor. The kind most people look at and think, trades, maybe. Foreman, if they're being generous. That suited me just fine. My wife Carol used to say I was the only man she'd ever met who genuinely didn't care what people thought of him. She meant it as a compliment. She passed 8 years ago, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, I threw myself back into work, not because I needed the money, but because silence in an empty house is a particular kind of weight that has to be balanced against something. My daughter, Ellie, was 26 when Carol died. She handled it the way young people handle grief, by moving forward fast, filling space with activity, new friends, a new apartment in Portland, a new life that looked bright and busy from the outside. I didn't begrudge her that. Everyone grieves differently. I missed her, but I understood. She called every Sunday. That was our arrangement. 52 Sundays a year, 15 minutes minimum, usually more. We talked about her work. She was a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing agency, and about the house, the garden, what I'd been building on weekends in the garage workshop. Normal things. Good things. Then about 2 years ago, the Sunday calls started changing. There was a new name. Kevin. She mentioned him the way you mention someone you're trying not to mention too much. Carefully, briefly, moving past it quickly. I noticed, but I didn't push. She'd bring him up when she was ready. She was ready about 3 weeks later. Dad, I want you to meet someone. Kevin. He works in commercial lending. He's a senior analyst at a regional bank up here. He's smart, really smart, and I think you'd actually like talking to him. I said I'd look forward to it. What I remember about the first dinner is this. Kevin arrived 12 minutes late, offered a handshake that was slightly too firm in the way that men who've read books about handshakes shake hands, and spent the first 20 minutes explaining his career trajectory to me without once asking what I did. He was 31. He had the particular confidence of someone who had done well at things, that are measured and graded, and had perhaps not yet encountered the kind of success that doesn't announce itself. He was well dressed. I'll give him that. Blue blazer, nice watch, shoes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He ordered the second most expensive bottle of wine without looking at the price, which is the move of someone who wants to appear comfortable with money without appearing reckless with it. I've seen that move 1,000 times in conference rooms. Ellie looked at him like he hung the moon. That was the part that mattered. Over dinner, Kevin asked what I did. I told him I was in real estate development, mostly some long-term holds. I kept it simple. I always keep it simple in social situations because I learned a long time ago that the moment you start listing credentials, you've already lost something. Oh, he said, like residential? Flipping houses, that kind of thing? Commercial, mostly, I said. Some mixed use. He nodded in the way that means he's filed the information and moved on. The market's tough right now, he said, with the tone of a man explaining weather to someone who lives outside. Rates are brutal for small operators. I agreed that rates were challenging. Ellie changed the subject. I caught her eye and she gave me a small, apologetic smile across the table. I shook my head slightly, don't worry about it, and asked Kevin about his work. He brightened immediately and talked about it for 20 minutes. I liked him the way you can like someone you don't trust. He was charming when he wanted to be. He was funny sometimes. He clearly made Ellie happy, which counted for more than anything else. But there was something underneath the charm that felt like calculation, like he was always running a quiet assessment of every room he walked into, every person he met, deciding where they ranked. It's a particular kind of social arithmetic that I've spent decades learning to spot. He had ranked me low, I could tell, and I let him. Over the next 18 months, I watched my daughter fall deeper in love, plan a future, and slowly start explaining me away. My dad's in real estate, small stuff mostly. I heard her say it once on a phone call she didn't know I could hear. I didn't correct her. I just sat on her porch with my coffee and looked at the mountains and thought, okay. Kevin proposed on a Tuesday in October. Ellie called me that evening crying with happiness, and I told her I was thrilled because I was. Whatever I thought of Kevin, Ellie's joy was real and it was mine to protect, not manage. The engagement dinner was at a restaurant Kevin chose, a steakhouse in downtown Portland that was, I'll admit, very good. His parents flew in from Connecticut. His father was a retired attorney, his mother a retired school administrator. They were pleasant people, genuinely warm, and I liked them immediately. We talked about Carol for a while, because they asked, and that meant something. Kevin's father pulled me aside near the end of the night, near the bar, and said quietly, I want you to know we're going to contribute to the wedding. We've talked to Kevin and we'd like to put in $30,000. We know it's not everything, but we want to help. I thanked him sincerely. Kevin was nearby. I don't know if he heard. Based on what happened later, I think he did, and I think he calculated from that number. The wedding planning took 11 months. Ellie wanted a venue she'd seen in the Willamette Valley, a converted barn and vineyard property about 40 minutes south of Portland. Beautiful place, genuinely beautiful. She'd been dreaming about it for years. I told her to book it. She asked about the cost. I told her not to worry about the cost. She hugged me for a long time when I said that. The total came to somewhere north of $180,000. Venue, catering, flowers, photography, band, the dress, the rehearsal dinner, the welcome bags for out-of-town guests. I paid for essentially all of it. Kevin's parents' $30,000 was applied to the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon contribution. My name was on every other vendor contract. Kevin knew this, in the way that someone who doesn't ask knows things, by the size of the thing happening around him and the absence of any obvious other explanation. He just never quite connected it to me. I think he'd decided I was the kind of man who might have scraped together some savings, maybe borrowed against a modest property, maybe stretched himself thin to give his daughter a nice day. I think that's the story he told himself because it fit the picture he'd already built of me. He was wrong. The morning of the wedding was clear and warm, early September, the kind of Oregon day that makes you understand why people stay. The vineyard property was stunning in the light. I'd arrived early to walk the grounds, something I always do at venues. Old habit, checking sidelines, drainage, the bones of a property. The event coordinator found me near the back fence line, taking in the view, and asked if I needed anything. I'm good, I said. It's a beautiful property. She nodded. The Harmon family does wonderful work. The renovation was years in the making. I nodded back. I knew the Harmon family. I'd sold them 2 parcels of land in the mid-2000s that had eventually become this property. But that wasn't a conversation for today. The ceremony was at 4. Ellie was radiant. I know that's a cliché, but there are clichés because they're the truest things available. She walked down the aisle toward Kevin, and I thought about Carol. About the 29 years we'd had, about all the small moments that add up to a life, and I was grateful. Even for the hard parts. Even for the loss. I was grateful to be standing there. The reception started at 6. Dinner was served. The toasts began. The band played old songs that made older guests sway on the edge of the dance floor. I danced with Ellie twice, which was 2 more times than I usually dance. Kevin had a few drinks. I noticed because I always notice, not out of judgment, just habit. 3 glasses of champagne during cocktail hour, 2 during dinner, then a glass of bourbon that appeared in his hand during the toasts. The best man finished. The maid of honor finished. Then Kevin took the microphone. I assumed he was going to toast Ellie. That's what you do. He toasted Ellie, then he kept going. I also want to say, he said, and his voice had the slightly blurred warmth of someone 2 drinks past his limit, that I'm so glad to be part of a family now. He looked around the room, working the crowd the way he'd learned in some leadership training. Ellie's dad is here. Gerald, stand up. Everyone see Gerald. I didn't stand up. I raised my glass from my seat. Gerald. He smiled. The smile was the kind that has something behind it. Gerald is a hard-working man. Salt of the earth, right? The kind of guy who, does his best with what he's got. He paused for laughter. Some people gave it to him. I always say it's not about what you have, it's about character. Gerald's got character. He's got... What does he do exactly, Ellie? Construction? Real estate? Something like that. More laughter. Uncomfortable laughter from the people paying attention. Anyway, Gerald, thank you for contributing to this day. He said contributing the way you'd describe someone who'd brought a covered dish to a potluck. The room had gone quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when something is wrong. But nobody's sure yet what it is. I looked at my daughter. She had gone pale. Her eyes were on me, wide, horrified, apologetic. I set down my glass. I folded my napkin. I stood up. Can I borrow that for a moment? I asked the event coordinator standing near the stage. She handed me the secondary microphone without a word. Thank you, Kevin, I said. My voice was level. I've spoken in boardrooms and city council hearings and investor meetings for 37 years. A room of 160 guests doesn't shake me. That was very kind. I paused. Let the silence sit. I don't talk about my work much, I said. Carol. Ellie's mother, she used to say it was my least attractive quality. That I kept things close. I smiled. A few people smiled back. She was usually right. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I'd put something there that morning, a reflex. The way a contractor walks a job site with a pencil behind his ear. It was a folded piece of paper, a printout of a property summary. Specifically, the summary for this property, the Harmon Vineyard Event Center. I want to tell you something about this venue, I said, because I think it's a wonderful place and it deserves to be properly introduced. I unfolded the paper. I acquired the land this building sits on in 2004, 2 separate parcels, combined acreage of about 41 acres. I sold them to the Harmon family in 2009. They had a vision for what this could become, and I agreed with that vision. I retain a minority equity stake in the property as part of that original sale agreement, which means that every time someone holds an event here, I gestured around, I benefit from that in a small way. The room was very quiet. I also own the building where Kevin's bank operates its Portland regional office, I said. I've been the landlord there for 11 years. And the apartment complex in the Pearl District where Kevin and Ellie lived before they bought their house? I was a general partner in that development. Small world. Kevin had stopped smiling. I've been in commercial real estate since 1987, I said. I've developed or acquired properties in 9 states. I don't talk about it because Carol said it made me boring at parties. A few people laughed, real laughs, the tension releasing. She was probably right about that too. I refolded the paper and put it back in my pocket. Kevin, I said. I looked at him directly. He was standing near the head table, very still, the bourbon glass forgotten in his hand. I am so glad my daughter found someone who makes her feel loved. I mean that. And I want you to know, everything I have, I built for her. Not to impress anyone, not to announce anything, just to make sure she was taken care of no matter what. I raised my glass toward Ellie, whose eyes were bright. This wedding, I said, cost $183,000. I paid for $151,000 of it, and I would have paid twice that without blinking to see my daughter look the way she looks tonight. I nodded at the band. Now play something good, I said. We are not done dancing. I handed back the microphone and sat down. The applause started somewhere in the middle of the room and spread. My daughter crossed the floor in her wedding gown and hugged me hard enough that I could feel the trembling in her shoulders. Relief, maybe, or emotion, or some combination of everything the day had held. Kevin stood where he was for a long moment. Then his father, a good man, a decent man, walked over and said something quietly to him, and Kevin sat down. The aftermath of that night was quieter than you might expect. Kevin called me 2 days later. His voice was controlled, careful, all the bourbon warmth gone. He said he owed me an apology. I told him I appreciated him saying so. He said he hadn't understood the full picture. I said that was understandable, because I hadn't painted it. What I said next, I mean completely. Kevin, I don't hold grudges. I've been around long enough to know they're expensive. And I've never liked paying for things that don't give me any return. He was quiet on the other end. But I do think we should know each other better than we do. So here's what I want. Sunday dinners at least once a month when you're both in town. I want to watch you be good to my daughter. That's all I want. He agreed. I've thought about that night often since. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with the kind of clarity that comes when a thing that has been unnamed finally gets named. I wasn't performing anything. I wasn't setting a trap. I'd simply gotten tired of being the outline of a person in someone else's story, and decided to fill myself in. The Harmon property had a record season that year. I got a small dividend check in October, as I do every year. I looked at it for a moment, thought about the vineyard in September light, thought about Ellie in her dress, thought about Carol saying, "You keep things too close, Gerald. Just let people see you sometimes." I put the check in the deposit pile and went back to work. I've been thinking about that September evening a lot lately. Not the applause, not Kevin's face when the room went quiet, but the moment right before I stood up. That half second where I made a choice. I could have stayed seated. I've stayed seated before, in rooms where people underestimated me, and walked away just fine. Silence has served me well most of my life. Carol used to say I collected slights the way other men collected tools, carefully, stored neatly, never thrown away but never used either. She wasn't wrong, but something about that night was different. Maybe it was hearing Ellie's name in Kevin's mouth right before the condescension. Maybe it was 37 years of building things. Real things, things that stand up in weather, and being reduced to salt of the earth like it was an insult dressed as a compliment. Maybe I was just tired of being the outline of a person in someone else's version of events. What I know is this: the consequences Kevin faced that night were entirely his own construction. He built them, beam by beam, over 18 months of small dismissals and quiet arithmetic about who mattered and who didn't. I didn't engineer his humiliation. I just stopped cooperating with the fiction he'd built around me. That's a meaningful distinction, and I've thought about it carefully, because I'm not interested in being the kind of man who enjoys bringing someone low. I've met those men. They don't build anything that lasts. There's something I've come to understand about the way choices accumulate. Kevin wasn't a bad person in the way that some people are irredeemably bad. He was a smart person who had let his intelligence convince him he could read a room, read a person, in 30 seconds flat. That's a particular kind of trap. The mind that's sharp enough to calculate everything starts to believe calculation is the same as understanding. It isn't. It never is. Understanding requires patience. It requires the humility to sit with what you don't know yet, and Kevin had never really practiced that. I have, not because I'm naturally humble. I'm not. Ask anyone who's been across a negotiating table from me, but because I had 40 years of projects that humbled me. Soil reports that came back wrong, partners who walked, a market that collapsed in 2008 and took 18 months of work with it. You build enough things, and eventually the work teaches you what you can control and what you can't, and you stop confusing the two. That's the thing I'd most want Kevin to understand if he's willing. Not that I have more money than he thought. That's just arithmetic, and it doesn't matter much. What matters is the work behind it, The early mornings and the bad bids and the projects that nearly broke me and the ones that made me get back up and try again differently. That kind of resilience, the kind you build by failing at things you care about and continuing anyway, that's the only currency that actually compounds over time. Ellie understood this. She grew up watching her mother face a diagnosis with more dignity than most people bring to ordinary inconvenience. She learned early what it looks like to carry something hard without letting it make you cruel. I've always been proudest of that in her. Not her talent, not her success, but the quality of her character under pressure. I put the check in the deposit pile that October and went back to work. The vineyard looked beautiful in the fall light, and somewhere in Portland, my daughter was building a life. That was the return I'd been working toward all along.